Hello. Today I'd like to give you an introduction to the Paddle Tennis Index, or PTI. First, I will give you a brief introduction. Next, we'll discuss how the initial PTI is set and how individuals reach their true north PTI. Since the algorithm is dynamic, meaning it adjusts after every match, I will then explain that adjustment process with some real-life examples. Finally, I will offer some parting comments. The PTI is a dynamic algorithm developed by the APTA and paddle scores to give the APTA and its member leagues a tool to indicate a paddle player's skill level for tournaments and league management purposes, such as lineups, creating teams, and placing teams within divisions. I must emphasize it is a tool, not an absolute measurement, but more on that later. PTI ratings range from a 0, which is a highly skilled player, to 80, which is a beginner with limited or no racket skills. Negative PTIs are possible, but these are primarily held by the elite players in the APTA. PTIs are standardized across genders and across all APTA leagues. For example, a male 50 in Pittsburgh is comparable to a female 50 in Cleveland. In general, the average PTI is between 50 and 60, with the men's average slightly higher. An initial default rating for an individual is set based on the average PTI weight for their division and line played. If there is match history, this is then fed into the algorithm. Representatives from the APTA and WPPTA spent the summer prior to 2019-20 season calibrating the weights used for each line and division so that they are comparable to the weights used in the other APTA leagues. If individuals had multiple records, these were merged into the PTI algorithm database. Since the WPPTA has used paddle scores for many years, the initial PTI default ratings were based on a 3-year match history dating back to the 2016-17 season. The PTI is based on a rolling 3-year match history. For a seasoned player, an accurate PTI rating is typically achieved after 7 matches. After 20 matches, a true north rating is achieved regardless of the initial start rating. For players who are just starting out and improving over time, obviously that will be more of a process. But after 20 matches, the rating is a fair representation at that particular point in time. It is important to understand that a PTI can fluctuate plus or minus 5 points over a season, depending upon match circumstances such as weather, playing with an injury or illness, good or bad days, partnerships, and so on. This is why the PTI should be used as a tool and not as a measure. At any given point in time, an individual may have had a bad streak, was playing injured, or played a bunch of matches in the wet, so to speak. Your rating may be better or worse than others at various points in time. The PTI is extremely helpful for lineup purposes, tournaments, and so on, and for observing general trends in your PTI. It is not helpful for focusing on your PTI at a specific point in time. A PTI cannot be changed. Only the initial start rating and confidence factor may be changed. The confidence factor is measured on a scale of 0 to 100% and represents how much underlying data is in the match history. For a person with little match history, that is a low number. The confidence factor becomes 100% once a player plays their 8th match. PTIs adjust more rapidly when the confidence factor is low. This allows the PTI to adjust to a more accurate rating after 7 matches. As stated previously, a player's true north PTI is achieved after 20 matches. As the majority of WPPTA players have significantly more than 20 matches in their match history, changing the start rating or confidence factor will make no difference in their PTI. Requests to change the initial start rating or confidence factor will be entertained only if there is minimal match history, injury, or PTIs are changing drastically over time, such as when there is an initial poor start rating. So, how does the PTI adjust? Well, it's all about expectations. For each match, the algorithm calculates your expected win percent based on your team's combined PTI relative to your opponent's. Winning or losing the match is the most important factor in determining your team's expectations. In the simplest terms, if you do better than expected, your PTI rating will improve. If you do worse than expected, your PTI rating will get worse. Before we start with examples, let's briefly discuss the confidence factor and scale. These components of the PTI influence how the rating changes based on how much match history is behind an individual's current rating. As stated previously, the confidence factor is measured on a scale of 0 to 100% and represents how much underlying data is in the match history. For a person with little match history, that is a low number. The confidence factor becomes 100% once a player plays their eighth match. The scale is the match weight. It ranges from 0 to 1 and is based on the confidence factor. A confidence factor of 100% is associated with a scale of 1. In simple terms, if there is 100% confidence that there is enough underlying data to support an accurate rating, the match being evaluated will fully count. Now, let's look at some specific examples to see how the PTI adjusts. Okay, so there's a lot of information in this screen, so let's take a look at what each element is showing. The first line shows the home team. Player A and B's PTI before the match are the first values shown in red immediately following their names. In this example, player A has a PTI of 42.2495 and player B has a PTI of 42.7661. The home team's combined PTI before the match is shown in red in the first of the outer columns, or 85.02. The corresponding values after the match are shown just after each value in blue. The second line shows this data for the away team. Player C and D's PTI before the match are 45.4985 and 50.0096 respectively. Their team combined PTI is 95.51. This particular match data is presented from player B's and hence the home team's perspective. Let's move to the line that shows the expected percent in red and actual percent in blue. Because the home team's combined PTI is 85.02, which is better than the away team's PTI of 95.51, the algorithm calculates an expected percent of 73%. The home team wins the match, as seen by the results. With the win and the final match score as inputs into the algorithm, it calculates the actual percent as also 73%. I want to make a side note here that this value is not the percentage of games won. The 73% actually also includes the win factor. The match counts fully towards each player's PTI since the confidence factor is 100% for each of them, and consequently the scale is 1.0 for each of them. Because B, the home team, performs exactly as expected, there is no change in anyone's PTI. The blue values that follow the red ones represent the data after the match. Now, let's look at an example where a team wins but underperforms their expectations. Okay, so let's look at an example where the team wins, but it underperforms its expectations. In this case, the PTI will actually get slightly worse because the actual percent is less than the expected percent. Again, this data is for player B's perspective. The home team's combined PTI is 86.05 and their opponent's is 101.86. The home team is a pretty heavy favorite here, and its expected percent is 82%. However, even though they won the match, their actual percent was calculated to be 77%. So, player A and B of the home team actually experience a slight increase or worsening of their PTI. A goes from 42.5905 to 42.7089, and B goes from 43.4624 to 43.5808. This is a change, but notice it's a small change. Conversely, the away team experiences a slight decrease or gets better in their PTI. Player C goes from 50.7000 to 50.5816, and player D goes from 51.1620 to 51.0436. Again, a small change. Now, let's look at an example where a team loses but outperforms expectations, which, by the way, is exactly what happened to the away team in this current example. In this example, a team loses a match, but it actually does better than expected. In this case, the PTI will get slightly better. Again, this data is from player B's perspective. The home team's combined PTI is 96.53 and their opponent's is 85.73. The away team is the favorite here, so the home team's expected percent is only 26%. However, even though they lost the match, their actual percent was calculated to be 29%, which is better than the expected percent of 26. The home team actually outperformed their expectations. So, player A and B of the home team actually experience a slight decrease or improvement of their PTI. A goes from 49.2200 to 49.1368, and B goes from 47.3076 to 47.2244. Conversely, the away team experiences a slight increase or gets worse in their PTI. Player C goes from 42.5828 to 42.6660, and player D goes from 43.1428 to 43.2260. Now, let's look at an example of an upset or lopsided victory. Anytime there is an upset or lopsided victory, large changes in PTIs can occur, sometimes as much as 2 or more points. This data is from player D's perspective. The home team's combined PTI is 83.54 and their opponent's is 84.96. This is a very even match, with the away team's expectations at 46%, almost half. However, the away team wins big, with their actual percent at 80%, which is much better than expected. The away team way outperformed their expectations. So, player C and D of the away team experiences a full point improvement in their PTI. C goes from 37.11425 to 36.1961, and D goes from 47.8192 to 46.8728. Conversely, the home team experiences a full point increase or gets worse in their PTI. Player A goes from 36.3780 to 37.3244, and player B goes from 47.1600 to 48.1064. Now, let's look at an example of when matches are skipped. The good news is that Uber teams are not required to crush their weaker opponents. Any match with PTI spreads of 21 points or higher are skipped unless the underdog wins. In this case, the home team's combined PTI is 64.71, whereas the away team's is 89.43. The home team is much stronger, as evidenced by the 24.72 PTI rating differential. In this case, the match is skipped. If the away team, the underdog, would have won, the match would have counted, and there would have been a huge movement in PTIs for both teams. So now that you've seen how the PTI works, you're probably thinking, but my partner stinks. Actually, playing with a weaker partner should not affect your PTI. The expected percent will adjust to account for the higher PTI of a weaker player. What does matter is whether your partner plays to their PTI. For example, it is better to play with a partner with a PTI of 50 but plays like a 45 than it is to play with a partner who is 5 but plays like a 10. Also, something to consider. Suppose you have a really bad day and cannot hit the side of a barn and your PTI takes a pretty big hit. The upside to that is your updated PTI is probably lower than your true north. So essentially, in your next match, you'll be underrated. If you perform better than expectations, which is now lower because of that hit you just took, your PTI will get better again after that next match. So the bottom line, when you have that bad day, just wash that memory away with adult beverages and do better the next match. So, the moral of this story is that the more you out or underperform relative to your expectations, the better or worse your PTI will become. On any given day, many outside factors come into play, such as a bad streak, injury, weather, and so on. Your rating may be better or worse than others at various points in time and can fluctuate by plus or minus 5 points or more over a season. The PTI is extremely helpful as a tool for lineup purposes, tournaments, and so on, and for observing general trends in your PTI. It is not helpful for focusing on your PTI at any specific point in time. Remember, everyone will have similar experiences over the course of the season. It will all even out eventually.